I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Border Studies, and we're co-sponsoring this event, so we're very happy to be co-sponsoring it. The speaker, Barbara Tenenbaum, is a little bit delayed. I think she may have been held up by some of Pancho Villa's men who are still out there riding around, but I'm sure she'll be here soon. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to also tell you about our speaker series at the Center for Latin American and Border Studies, which will be beginning next week on February 27th, and we'll have Jenny Luna, who's here in the Women's Studies department, and she's going to be giving a talk titled Land and Identity Through a Nahua Worldview. And we have a series of other speakers over the course of the semester. Sarah Lyon of the University of Kentucky will be speaking on March 7th at 4 p.m. a talk titled The Taste of a Different World, Maya Farmers and the Global Coffee Market. Then on April 9th, Héctor Padilla of the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez, border crossing experiences at bridges in the El Paso Juárez region. And that talk will be held in Spanish, but we will translate it into English. Next, Jesus Rosales of Arizona State University on April 17th at 4 p.m. Chicano Literary Journals in Spanish, Creating Cultural Bridges on the U.S.-Mexico Border. And finally, Jamie Starling, who's visiting professor here at New Mexico State University on April 24th, and I think he gets the prize for the best title, second only to Barbara Tenenbaum's great titles, which is From the Moment That I Made My Wedding Vows, My Suffering Began. A divorce in the Mexican frontier, 1823 to 1838. So I just wanted to let you know about our program, and if you're interested in receiving emails directly to tell you about these talks, I'll go ahead and pass out a sign-up sheet and just put your name and email down, and we can give those to you. And now I think I'll turn it over to Molly, and once again just say how happy we are to be able to collaborate with the library in sponsoring this event.
Thanks, Inigo. I'm sorry that Barbara's just a little bit late. She has, she's right on her way, but the person who was bringing her here this afternoon had, just wasn't quite sure exactly which turn to take, so I was on the cell phone guiding them in. But she'll be here very shortly.
I was blaming Pancho Villa.
Yeah. But anyway, my name's Molly Malloy, and I'm the Border and Latin American Specialist here at the library. And I have known Barbara for a long time. I met her probably close to 20 years ago at a meeting of the Seminar on Latin American Library Materials, a meeting of librarians from all over the country and Latin America and the world. A lot of European librarians are part of that group. And we are all charged by our institutions with bringing Latin American materials directly from the region into our collections. And Barbara is, first and foremost, a very prominent historian of Mexico, and she was a PhD historian before she became a librarian. She's published many monographs and articles, and she's also the editor-in-chief of the multi-volume set Encyclopedia of Latin American History, which is one of really the primordial reference works for all of us interested in Latin American history and culture. She's taught at Vassar College at University of South Carolina, Catholic University, and Howard University before she joined the Hispanic Division of the Library of Congress, where she is in charge of all of the Mexican acquisitions of the library. She calls her job at the Library of Congress the perfect job for me, because she gets to use all of her very deep knowledge of the history of Mexico and her knowledge of librarianship to bring these wonderful materials into the collections. Without further ado, I think Barbara's just arrived, and I'll introduce Dean Titus also. Hi, Barbara, come sit down.
I finally got it.
And Dean Titus would like to say a few words. Oh, actually, one little thing that I will do very quickly. one of the things we wanted to do today was honor Barbara for her gift to us. And just so that you can see how that works. And we wanted to apologize probably to Barbara for the weather. One of her reasons for coming to Las Cruces in the late winter is to get away from winter in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, it's here to greet her. But she gave us basically nearly 200 books. Most of them have all been cataloged for our library. And these were unique materials that we didn't already have in our library collections. And one of the things that we like to do for donors is apply an electronic bookplate to the books so that with one simple search of the donor's name, you can see all of the materials that they have donated to us. And so thanks to our wonderful cataloging staff, Liz Miller and Joanne Vincent and others.
Joanne mostly.
Thank you. We were able to make this little bookplate available on all of the books that are Barbara's, that now belong to the library. So thank you, and Dean Titus will say a few words.
Hello. Hi. How are you doing?
All right.
Glad you could make it.
Oh, me too.
Well, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of NMSU Library and the Center for Border Studies. We are delighted to have all of you with us today. And it's always good to come together. One of our jobs is to make sure that knowledge is shared. We just don't storehouse it. We also want to celebrate it and celebrate content. So we welcome you and thank you for attending. I'm just going to introduce Barbara and then let her get on with the business of sharing her wonderful wealth of information with us. Dr. Barbara Tenenbaum is a Latin American historian and a specialist of Mexican culture in the Hispanic Division of the Library of Congress and curator of the J.I. Kislak Collection in the Rare and Special Collections Division. She joined the Hispanic Division of the Library of Congress in 1992. A specialist in Mexican culture, she has also authored and edited many books and articles about Mexico in the Library of Congress Hispanic Collection. In addition to many other monographs and articles, Dr. Tenenbaum is editor-in-chief of the multi-volume Encyclopedia of Latin American History and Culture. She studied at Harvard University, where she earned her doctorate. Dr. Tenenbaum's generosity and recent donations from her personal collections of research materials on Mexican and Latin American history, economics, and cultures have provided the NMSU Library with over 160 books. It is one of our institutional goals that we will be a border history institution in terms of our collections. So for us, we are absolutely thankful that we can build the depth of the collections in the areas in which we believe we have a unique role in collecting content and preserving it for future generations. Now please join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Tenenbaum.
I can't tell you how thrilling it is to be here. I mean, really, to be here. Never, ever ask somebody who's only been here 5 years to come to take you to the library. Yeah, you're going to have to. That's it. All right. Well, anyhow, it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you, I'm going to put it this way, about what a historian would consider to be a most timely subject. Let me thank my friends at the Library of the State University of New Mexico at Las Cruces, especially Molly Malloy, who has been my shining star, not just in terms of my relationship with her, but also for all of her good work in detailing the mess that is seen at Vámonos these days. Bravo to Molly. And let me also put in a word of thanks to my compadre, Professor Garcia Bryce, of the Latin American Studies Center, who collaborates in scheduling these lectures. I also want to thank my assistant, Jeff Helm, for putting the PowerPoint together with me so that we could do this today. Now, does anybody know what anniversary we celebrate, what 100th anniversary we celebrate tomorrow, February 22nd, 2013? Nobody. I thought Professor Sadler would know this. I even wrote in, no fair, Professor Sadler, but all right. Tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of the assassination of President Francisco Madero and Vice President Jesus Pino Suarez. So, and there they are.
Next one?
Not yet.
Okay.
And those murders led to the presidency of Victoriano Huerta, a presidency we're going to discuss today. Mexicans, understandably, do not want to acknowledge the role of the United States in their revolution. Not only does Mexico share a 1,500-mile border with the Colossus of the North, not only did it surrender 55% of its territory to that northern neighbor, but it wants to think that the revolution was something Mexico did completely on its own. If you think about it, the United States isn't that different. Rarely do we ever mention that it was the Spanish governor of Louisiana, Bernardo de Galvez, that sewed up the South for the Patriots with his victories at Baton Rouge, Mobile Bay, and Pensacola. Now, how many of you knew that until I just mentioned it? Good for you. Oh, sure, we mentioned Lafayette and that Polish dude, but they were far away and unlikely to harm the U.S. subsequently. But the U.S. did, in fact, play a very significant role in the Mexican Revolution, as I will show you today. Now, I'm only going to discuss a certain facet of it. There's a lot more coming about how the United States was involved in the revolution, but that's for other people to talk about. The Library of Congress is assembling a bilingual website on its holdings on the Mexican Revolution. And it's bilingual thanks to the Mexican Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, who gave us money to put in the Spanish translations. So it's really very exciting to us. We're very happy. This is not a blanket history of the revolution. Rather, it's a history based on the sources that we have at the Library of Congress. And we hope that, like Professor Sadler and Harris, scholars will come to the library to use those materials. So let me say a few words about the Library of Congress. The library officially began in 1800 and was housed in the U.S. Capitol building because it was thought, and this might get a laugh, that, quote, there was no subject about which a congressperson need not to refer, unquote. However, in 1814, during the War of 1812, British troops burned down the U.S. Capitol and therefore destroyed the library. After the war was concluded, the nation needed a new library, and Thomas Jefferson, always in need of money, he was a terrible spendthrift, offered to sell his collection of over 6,000 volumes. Congress bought the books, and by the way, some congressmen really objected to the price. Nothing new there. And the library was restarted. By the way, the current library is trying to reassemble Jefferson's original library, and we now have more than 90% of it. In 1897, the library opened its first independent building. It's the one in which I work, appropriately named the Jefferson Building, so you see it right there. It was built by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it is one of the most beautiful structures in the United States. So, and it's free. So, you know, if you're ever in Washington, D.C., I suggest that you come and visit it, because it is truly a gorgeous building. This one. The other two, all right. It was built, okay. Subsequent buildings appeared as well. The Adams Building across the street opened in the 1930s. There it is. And the Madison building opened in the 1980s. And there that is. We now also have 2 annexes in Maryland, one at Landover and the other at Fort Meade, and a complex specifically for film collection in Culpeper, Virginia. Our collections are estimated at about 145 million items. I'm giving you a little moment to get your brain around 140. The problem is that we don't have the space to store the stuff.
Amazing.
We have over 12 million photographs that have yet to be cataloged. We do not know what they are. It's frightening. And we are by far the largest library in the world. Now, next week, they're going to proclaim a sequestration, and the library is going to suffer an 8% cut. So you can just imagine what's the pandemonium that's going to break out. All of the Area Studies Division, that is the African and Middle Eastern, the Asian, the European, and the Hispanic, are located in the Jefferson Building. So I wanted you to see the Great Hall.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, it is beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Mm-hmm.
And you can visit it for free. As are the humanities part of the general collections. The social science part is located in the Adams Building, while the Madison Building contains what we call special collections, which include geography and map, performing arts, music, serials and government publications, law, prints and photographs, motion pictures, broadcasting and recorded sound, among others, and the U.S. Copyright Office. So a lot of stuff gets done. I want you to know, for those of you who think that the government only increases, that when I came to the library 21 years ago, we had 5,200 employees. Now we have 3,300 employees. Which is, yes, and Lord knows how many employees we're going to have by the end of this year. Although you might think from its title that the Library of Congress is mostly confined to items concerning the U.S., the precise opposite is true. The library has many more items in foreign languages than in English. Now, how do we get these items? We generally get things published in English through the Copyright Office. I suppose that many people wonder why it is that the library insists on 2 copies of each work. 1 copy goes to the collections, assuming it fits our criteria. We don't accept everything because we couldn't. Some people think that the library has every book that was ever written. It doesn't. We couldn't, for instance, we don't collect cookbooks, recent cookbooks. Historical cookbooks, yes. So it's, and the other copy, most often we use for exchange with other libraries, hopefully abroad. The library has treats all over the place for the Latin Americanists. In fact, there is not a single division in the library in which there isn't material for someone interested in Latin America. For example, if you want to look at U.S. relations with Latin America, you don't have to go farther than the manuscript division, which holds the presidential papers of every president from George Washington to Calvin Coolidge. Today I will talk about the sources we have on a very important aspect of that historical circumstance that we call the U.S. invasion and occupation of Veracruz on April 21st, 1914, lasting until November of that year. In order to understand this crucial event, we have to go back to the U.S. presidential election of 1912. In 1900, there you go. In 1900, President William McKinley ran for a second term with Theodore Roosevelt as his vice president. Now, there's a story here, too, because McKinley's first vice president died in office, so he had to get a new one. Now, Theodore Roosevelt was a very unconventional choice because a lot of people hated his guts, particularly Mark Hanna, who was the boss of the Republican Party. But Roosevelt got the nod, and so he became vice president. There was an ulterior motive. They wanted to get him out of New York because he was causing too much trouble. They figured that being vice president, and you know how the vice presidency has been characterized, that would get him out of trouble. Little did they know. On September 14, 1901, McKinley was shot and he died a few days later. By the way, this was medical error, yet again, making Roosevelt president. In 1904, Roosevelt ran for his second term and stupidly proclaimed that it would be his last. That was a big mistake. He strongly supported William Howard Taft. You see, I have to tell you a funny story. We have a baseball team now in Washington, D.C., yay, called the Nationals. And after the fourth inning, when we're at home, we have the presidential race. And we have, up until start of the new season, we had 4 presidents. We had George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. Well, Teddy Roosevelt never won a race. And there were all sorts of proclamations, let Teddy win, let Teddy win. So the last baseball game of the season, and it happened to be the one where I was there, Teddy won because they were playing Philly, and the Philadelphia Fanatic, if you know anything about Philadelphia sports, the Philly Fanatic tripped all the other presidents, and Teddy won. So there were big headlines, Teddy wins. Well, now they've adopted a 5th president, and that is none other than William Howard Taft, who is known as Bill. Now this I have to see, because William Howard Taft weighed 340 pounds. They had to construct a special bathtub for him, because he was so big. Well, I can't wait to see this. Now, my assistant Jeff Helm says that probably what's going to happen is they'll let Bill win the first race, and after that, Teddy will keep tripping him, so he'll never win again. Now, in 1909, Taft became the first U.S. president to meet his Mexican counterpart, in this case, Porfirio. And there is Don Porfirio at age 80. Look at all those medals. Amazing. He was quite impressed with the old man, as he called Diaz, and he confided to his wife Nellie that he hoped Diaz would outlive him, which is rather unlikely, but in 1910, the Mexican Revolution began while Taft was still president, and Diaz went into exile in May 1911 when he was succeeded by Francisco de la Barra. Next slide. And there he is. And then Francisco Madero. In November 1912, 4 men ran against each other for the presidency of the United States. Okay, now this cartoon is unbelievable. I love this cartoon. Now you see Taft on the donkey, on the elephant, right? But you got to look closely, because the bull moose that Teddy Roosevelt is riding is pulling at the tail of the elephant. See, he's got the tail in his mouth, keeping him back. Now on the donkey is Woodrow Wilson, all right? And then we had to add Eugene V. Debs, who was the 4th candidate in 1912. Okay, this is by Clifford Kennedy Berriman. We have a wonderful collection at the library of political cartoons. So it's a fabulous thing. And in fact, Teddy Roosevelt was giving a speech as the Bull Moose candidate, and he was shot. And he was such a tough guy that he continued giving the speech and wouldn't go to the hospital until after he'd finished talking. Anyway, I know. Roosevelt was very disillusioned with Taft for his lack of interest in progressive reforms and his substitution of dour diplomacy for a more muscular foreign policy like Teddy was in favor of. With the Republican vote split, Woodrow Wilson won the election. Although judging from the Electoral College results, he would have won anyway, but you can't tell what the confluence of factors would have been. In those days, presidential inaugurations took place in March rather than the January they are now. And that's not a stupid idea, because the weather in D.C. is much better in March than it is in January. So William Howard Taft remained president until March 4th, 1913. On February 9th, 1913, Felix Diaz, who's on the left, nephew of Porfirio Diaz, and General Bernardo Reyes, who is on the right, former governor of the state of Nuevo León, that's the state of which Monterrey is the capital, revolted against Madero and created havoc in Mexico City. Next slide, please. All right, this is one of the few pictures we have of it, what is known as the Cena Trágica, the tragic 10 days. And that period ended with the Pact of the Embassy, so called because it was brokered by U.S. Ambassador Henry Lane Wilson. So let's take a look at him. On February 22nd, 1913, exactly 100 years ago tomorrow, Madero and his vice president were assassinated, and Victoriano Huerta became president. Next slide. He's the one with the eye patch, sitting there. He's only got one medal, but I mean, if he had been there longer, who knows?
Yeah. Do you know who was he assassinated?
No, he was not assassinated. One of the few. William Howard Taft would be president only for another 11 days. And so he left the recognition of the new president of Mexico to his successor. Next slide, please. As he noted in his letter to his brother Charlie, quote, "I am very much pleased that the tension in Mexico City has been revealed, so that the prospect of any necessity for me submitting the question of intervention to Congress has passed away. I shall, however, send troops down into the neighborhood with a view to turning the opportunity over to my successor to act as he will should occasion arise hereafter," unquote. So, as you can see, he held off any recognition of President Huerta, preferring to leave it up to his successor, Woodrow Wilson. Now, let me stop for a second. I want you to think about this, because this is very important. If Taft had won a second term, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I think in any historian's mind, Professor Souther, will you agree with me on this one?
Yes.
That Taft would have recognized Huerta, like everybody else. Right? However, Taft didn't get a second term. And because Taft didn't get a second term, and Woodrow Wilson became president, things turned out very differently. Okay, so let's see Wilson. And there he is with Taft on Inauguration Day. They're yucking it up. Okay, Wilson, upon taking office, and as Secretary of State, next slide please, William Jennings Bryan, steadfastly refused to recognize Huerta, mostly because he was a usurper who had not come to power by democratic means. In other words, he hadn't been elected. It doesn't really matter whether he killed these guys himself, or whether he ordered it, or whether somebody else ordered it, or whether it just happened. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, what matters is that they were dead and he wasn't elected. So we continue. But there were other factors at play. For one thing, other leaders had declared themselves in revolt against Huerta, including, next slide, Venustiano Carranza. You can always tell him because he's got the white beard. He's much older than the other people. He was a senator for a short period from Coahuila, his state. Next slide, please. And the guy in the white, that's Alvaro Obregón. And now we know that that picture must have been taken before 1915 because he lost an arm at the Battle of Santa Rosa. And in this picture, he's got two hands. So it's a very, very funny story. A great historian of the Revolution, Michael Meyer, who taught for many years at the University of Arizona, had a collection of statues of revolutionary leaders, and he sent them to a friend of mine, and his wife called the friend and said she was so sorry, but somehow the statue of Obregon had lost an arm. That story. All right, next slide, please. And that, of course, is Pancho Villa. That's taken when he was still a colonel. So that's an early picture of him. And of course, and I say of course because Emiliano Zapata was in revolt always against everybody. So, you know, that's why I say of course. He's, you know, that's not his fault. That's just, you know, people just weren't about to divide up the lands the way he wanted them to be. So there were at least two other possibilities to be president of Mexico, Carranza and Villa. Also, we must keep in mind that we're looking at a time 100 years ago, full of prejudices, much more racist, because Huerta was Indio, and much more worried about alcohol. Remember, Prohibition would be passed only 6 years later. And everyone knew, next slide please, that Huerta liked the bottle. And you can see in this cartoon that he's actually carrying a bottle. Just in case you might not have remembered. And then he's got a knife, a bloody knife. So, you know, just in case you didn't know that this guy was a no-good, that's make sure that you would figure that out. Even though by September 1913, 75 of the nations recognized the Huerta presidency, the U.S. did not. And much of Latin America followed its lead. In addition, Wilson didn't much care for U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Henry Lane Wilson, no relation, who had been involved in some degree with the assassination of Madero and Pino Suarez. We'll never know, I think, although, who knows? I mean, to what extent his involvement was. So in June, Wilson sent down his own diplomatic agent, clergyman, journalist, and personal friend, William Bayard Hale. And there he is. Now, you got to keep in mind that Wilson had been president of Princeton University before he became president of the United States, and Wilson was really a very moralistic guy. And I think he had gone to divinity school. He was a theologian of some sort. So it makes perfect sense that he would send his friend William Bayard Hale. And some scholars criticized this selection because he didn't know any Spanish. But in so doing, they missed the point. Well, Hale wasn't supposed to talk to Mexicans, right, who didn't speak English. He was supposed to discuss the situation with Americans living in Mexico to find out what they thought without recourse to the reports of the ambassador whom he distrusted. Hale did talk to American businessmen in Mexico, and while they weren't thrilled with Madero, that's putting it somewhat mildly, Hale did talk. Hale made it seem in his report to Wilson that they would welcome a different leader than Huerta. And he made it clear that Henry Lane Wilson was involved in what he termed a military plot, quote unquote. So Wilson continued his policy of non-recognition, thus tacitly supporting the efforts of Huerta's rivals, and he beefed up the fleet in the area that Taft had originally deployed it. And so it continued. In August of 1914, Wilson removed Henry Lane Wilson as ambassador. Am I getting the dates right? No, 1913. Wilson removed Henry Lane Wilson as ambassador, leaving in charge the charge d'affaires. And in September declared a moratorium on arms shipments to Mexico. At the same time, he sent John Lind, journalist, former governor of Minnesota, and good friend of Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, to Mexico as his personal representative. Lind wrote the same kind of report as had Hale. So in other words, Wilson is getting these reports But but Lind inserted himself much more into Mexican politics than Hale had, and he made his own. He gave his own advice. For example, he told Wilson that under no circumstances was he to recognize Villa. He says it has to recognize Carranza. And that created a lot of problems, but we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. In April 1915, Mexican authorities arrested a group of U.S. sailors, next slide please, from the USS Dolphin on the left, from the USS Dolphin on the streets of Tampico, which is to the north in the Gulf of Mexico, north of Veracruz. They were soon released, but U.S. authorities demanded that the Mexicans salute the U.S., give a 21-gun salute to the U.S. flag. The Mexicans, under the leadership of Ignacio Moreno Zaragoza, agreed. But President Huerta declared that the U.S. sailors should then salute the Mexican flag with an equivalent salute. At first, that looks like a simple reciprocity, right? I mean, 21 guns here, 21 guns there, But if the United States had officially saluted the Mexican flag, it would be a tacit recognition of the Huerta government, something Wilson absolutely refused to do. So it was nothing doing. No salutes to the Mexican flag. Now, if it had been a simple matter of false imprisonment and tit-for-tat recognition, then the United States would then subsequently have invaded Tampico. Instead, next slide please, it invaded Veracruz on April 21st, 1914, with 15 ships and 38 more in reserve. The U.S. had calculated that this invasion would be an easy matter, confined to a few targets. The ostensible idea was to stop a German ship, the Ipiranga, from offloading weapons intended for Veracruz that the U.S. had for invading Veracruz. For Veracruz was the headquarters of Venustiano Carranza, and the United States wanted to see what would happen if it were in the vicinity. Also, let's throw in protecting U.S. and British oil fields, which were a heck of a lot closer to Veracruz than Tampico. All right. That is a map of the oil fields in the vicinity of Veracruz. And it comes from one of the agencies of the government. You see it says canceled. All right. Somehow the library ended up with it. We end up with all sorts of stuff. And we ended up with it. And all those little marks, those are oil wells that we're protecting. So it isn't as though we went to Veracruz because, gee, wouldn't it be fun to go to Veracruz? It was because, we want to make sure that nothing happens. So could we have the next slide, please? There we go. So in this picture, we see U.S. troops arriving in the harbor of Veracruz. But, of course, as always, things didn't happen as planned. The Mexicans resisted. They weren't supposed to resist. They were supposed to say, welcome, lucky guys.
Yeah.
Right? They're supposed to have flowers. They're supposed to give flowers. Have you heard that recently? Somehow it sticks in my mind. All right, anyway. But that didn't happen. And Mexicans resisted, particularly local citizens and the cadets from the Naval Academy. Now, these are pictures of the Naval Academy. Do you notice? This huge hole? Because the U.S. troops fired on the Naval Academy, creating these holes. And there's a U.S. Guy with, Mexicans, so they were showing that, they were getting back at the Naval Academy for naval cadets who tried to resist. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, here are the troops entering the barracks in Veracruz. And next slide. and marching over to help at the waterworks. The U.S. stayed in Veracruz until November 23rd, 1914, even though World War I had already broken out in Europe in early August. Now, the U.S. Navy got pretty jingoistic about the invasion and issued its magazine, The Mini, so named, there's The Mini. Now, is this not terrific? Look at this. Welcome to our city, Veracruz, Mexico. So much for political correctness in 1914. Welcome to our city. I mean, when I saw this for the first time, I cringed. I said, it's just absurd. But we, you know, it's in the manuscript division, so we were just happy to have it. Yeah, next slide, please. Now here we see the three leaders of this enterprise. From left to right, Rear Admiral Charles Badger, the commander-in-chief of the whole operation. Next is Admiral Henry Mayo, the commander of the fleet in Tampico. And number 3 was Admiral Frank Friday Fletcher. I'm not making this up. The leader of the invasion of Veracruz. The American public was really invested in this war. Next slide, please. 27-year-old Irving Berlin, just getting started, wrote this ditty. They're on their way to Mexico. Right? Okay. Now, if I ever get a chance to present to you the Pershing materials, which I hope to, you'll get to see the songs that were associated with that. You know, he left his girl behind to follow the truth. Next one, please. While Uncle Sam sailed southward in this marching song, off to Mexico. And a lot of people object to this. You know, it's almost as if they think that I make these things up. You know, I don't even have that good an imagination. I mean, here we have Uncle Sam. He's got a flag attached to his rifle, right? He's dragging along a cannon, right? And you know, and people were offended by this. Well, heck, I mean, this is almost 100 years old. Hopefully, we're better than that.
Yeah.
I said hopefully. When the United States left, they didn't take their weapons with them, leaving them for Carranza, even though he had never shown the least inclination to be favorable to Mexico's northern neighbor. In fact, he hated the United States, and he was doing everything he could to undermine it, which will come out soon in a book by Sadler and Harris called The Plan of San Diego, right? Okay. See, a little plug. Unlike Pancho Villa was very favorable to the United States and tried very hard to protect mining interests. Well, he would get money, but he would protect mining interests in his area. And soon in October 1915, following the advice of John Lind, the U.S. recognized Carranza as the leader of Mexico. Now, this is just a sample of the richness of the holdings of the Library of Congress on the invasion of Veracruz. Ultimately, Villa would attack. He was so annoyed that the U.S. recognized Carranza instead of, which really makes no logical sense if you think about it. Recognized Carranza and not him, that he went and attacked Columbus, New Mexico, and a certain person has promised that she will take me there on my next trip. Isn't that right, certain person? Forcing the United States to send in the Pershing expedition, but that's a subject for another time and another talk. So thanks very much.
We have plenty of time for some questions and answers with Barbara. So
I might know answers, I don't promise.
So feel free to ask questions. I have to run and get something, and I'll be right back. But
Oh dear.
questions and answers.
What prompted your interest in this field of study?
In Mexico? Well, what happened is that many, many years ago, and I'm not going to say how many years ago, I followed Leon Trotsky to Mexico. I thought I was going to be a historian of Russia, because my grandmother was Russian. And so I went to Mexico to interview Trotsky's grandson on Christmas Day. It was 80 degrees on Christmas Day. And I was walking in Coyoacan to the house, and I fell. And within 30 seconds, the Mexicans rushed out of their houses. They had chairs, they gave me an aspirin, they were so nice. And I said to myself, why am I studying Russia, which is cold and has bad food, when I can study Mexico, which is warm and has good food? And I've never changed my mind, and I've never regretted that decision. I mean, Mexico is a wonderful, fascinating place to study, and I never get tired of it because there's always something else. So that's, you know, I mean, it really, I mean, it's just, any time period you want to study, there's something great involved. I just finished reading 1491, you know, and all sorts of, you know, stuff I didn't know about. Very, very interesting. And now about the Mexican Revolution, this may not have been my best choice to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the, you know, in 2010, because my librarian, Dr. James Billington, is a historian of Russia. And the word revolution gives him the heebie-jeebies. You know, no matter how many times I've tried to explain to him that the Mexican Revolution was not like the Russian Revolution, the word revolution, I mean, I took him down to Mexico, and I said, would you like to see Trotsky's house? No, he didn't want to see Trotsky's house. I mean, he said, are you going to reenact? But, you know, I mean, so the word revolution just really, now I could say something about the fact that there are certain governments that also got very nervous about the concept of the 100th anniversary of the Mexican Revolution, but I won't say that. But the library was founded, remember, in 1800 and burned in 1814. So we don't have very much material on the independence, but we have wonderful material about the revolution. So it was a natural to do the revolution, despite the fact that people have problems with that word. So, in fact, I'm hoping that the Mexican Cultural Institute will let me give a talk next February on the anniversary of the Constitution about how different the Mexican Revolution really was, and how different the Constitution really is from revolution in Russia or China or Cuba or any other place. But you know, we'll see what happens with that. So that should answer that question. Sir.
Yes, you said, excuse me, you said the Library of Congress is the largest library in the world.
Yeah, by far.
Would you say that your collection has, the Mexican history collection has more material than any library in Mexico or Spain, or how does that compare?
Well, you're asking me to compare apples and mangoes. If you need primary documents, I mean, I would go to the University of Texas if you'd want to do the 19th century. Mexico City has wonderful facilities. No, I take that back. It has wonderful archives. Facilities, for example, you go to the archive of the city of Mexico. They don't have a Xerox machine. I mean, I used to go to the Biblioteca La Fuagra on Isabella Católica, when it was on Isabella Católica before it moved to the university, and my joke was, it was the Society for the Creation of the Blind. Because the lighting was so bad, you know, so my feeling is that no, In many regards, we do not have the best collection of Mexican stuff. We have wonderful things. However, our things are very well organized. And so if you want to do a project on Mexico, you should consider coming to the Library of Congress or going to UT Austin, to the Natalie Benson Library, because you'll get a lot of work done in a shorter amount of time. And we also, I make it a point for us to always get archival guides. So you can be really prepared to go. But of course, then they'll change the notations and then you have to start all over again, but that's beside the point. I mean, you know, there are joys to researching in Latin America. And you have to be prepared for them. Hi.
I'm just wondering, as a follow-up to that, for students who are here and might be wanting to use these materials, how much of this is available on the web if they're not able to get to Washington?
We have 5 million pieces on the web. But this, the stuff I just showed you, you can get some of the photographic material on the web, because the Prints and Photographs Division has put up a lot of things on the web. And it's continuous. They keep putting more and more things up. But for the other things, for instance, the presidential letters that I showed, you got to go. You got to go to D.C., which is not a bad thing to do.
It's not a punishment.
No, it's not a punishment. D.C. is a wonderful place, particularly in the spring and the fall.
Yeah. Yes.
And and we're very well organized, and we have a staff that works very hard, contrary to popular belief. And so, you know, a trip to Washington is, or UT. I mean, it depends on what you're studying. I did my dissertation work at UT because I read a lot of pamphlets, and then I went to Mexico and read some more pamphlets. And I read that UT has enormous archives for the 19th century. They have Limantour papers, they have the Gomez Farias papers, they have the Lucas Alaman papers, they have a lot of material there. And I'm not going to say, as some people do, that we have a better collection than they do, because we don't. Not for the 19th century. But if you know, and we have all the secondary literature. Or I would say 98% of the secondary literature. You can never have all of it, because, you know, there are always things that slip through your fingers. And, you know, in Latin America, they publish a lot of stuff privately to give out as Christmas presents. I mean, just imagine, for just a second, if a U.S. corporation gave out a book as a Christmas present. I mean, it boggles the mind. But in Mexico, they do that. They give it, you know, like Cemex or I don't know if Bimbo does that, but lots of companies do that, or whether Slim does that. But I mean, lots of companies in Mexico give out books, and we don't. And they're printed by the company, and then and it's very difficult to get a copy, because, you know, they only print like 100 copies, and and Lord knows if you're going to be able to get it. So some things slip through our fingers. And then UNAM, which is the largest university in Mexico, has the worst distribution system you can possibly imagine, right? And they will tell you that themselves. So that, you know, that's something I want to work on this year, is to try to get some UNAM stuff that we didn't get yet, that was published years ago. I have to contact the authors to see if they'll give us a copy. Because their distribution is absurd. And everything is into facultades or institutos. And, you know, and then you go there and it's, oh, no, we distribute it. No, it's tough. It's tough. But the answer to the question is, it's really a good place to go to prepare to go to Latin America. At least I've always found it that way. Yeah.
Between Casas Grandes and Monte Ortiz, where all the pots come from, there's a hacienda there. It's called Hacienda San Diego, and the locals will tell you that Madero was inaugurated where the word president in this place. Now, is that just a pile of baloney, or is it a possibility?
You want to speak to that?
he certainly was there during the course of the revolution in 1911. There's a period in which I've seen some photographs of that, but but in terms of, he obviously could not do it until he controlled the countryside, and he couldn't do that until he got to Mexico City, and, you know,
Right.
so I would say, technically no, you know.
Why mess up the good
It
story?
makes a
with
good
Pact?
story, I agree.
And Lord knows we love a good story. Sorry.
I too have been to Durango and Chihuahua and visited a lot of the museums there. And you're right, the facilities are in poor shape and they have primary documents that are exposed to the elements. Do you know of any digitizing projects between Library of Congress or any other university that is trying to help preserve that?
I will give Molly the email of the head of Latin American Studies program at Georgetown, and he can put you in. You know, they're working on that. But the institution itself, I tried to arrange something for Paraguay, and the Paraguayans wouldn't send the appropriate, request, so they never got the digitization. Paraguay, if you can believe this, does not have any record of congressional, there's no digitization of any congressional debates or discussions or anything. So we were trying to get it digitized, and they didn't do it. So if you know people in Durango, Chihuahua, other places that really are serious about digitizing and are willing to do the request, then, the library itself doesn't do it. Now, there's another issue. At the Library of Congress, we have something called the World Digital Library, in which we try to put what the librarian calls foundational documents online. Now, for example, we have online the Florentine Codex. We just got it. I mean, we're doing digital repatriation of the codices, which I think is just great. I mean, I'm really excited about it. Yeah, can you make it's
I'll find it.
go to Mexico and then it's sponsored by UNESCO and Latin American Curator. What would it be? No, I think it's under Latin America, even though I wouldn't have put it there. Let's see.
Here's Mexico.
Okay, good.
I know that the British, and I don't know if it's the British Library, but I can to answer that question. I mean, if that question is about concrete initiatives to try to do this, talk to me because I can.
Well, I would also like to put in a plug for what this library, NMSU Library, did starting back around 1990. Is we did not digitize, but we microfilmed the collections of the Archbishopric of Durango. It was an agreement between our library, between the Archbishop personally in Durango, in the cathedral, and we also were assisted in funding for that from the state legislature of New Mexico, thanks to Mr. J. Paul Taylor. Mm-hmm. His wife, his late wife, Mary Taylor, was a historian of that region, our region, and knew of the importance of this collection and enabled us to go down there and do the microfilming. And I believe that collection now has more than 800 reels of film that's available here in the archives in Branson Library. And that's a very important collection because church archives are much harder to obtain permission to film or to preserve in any kind of digital format. In fact, I don't believe that our agreement with Durango would allow us to digitize the material, but it is preserved in microfilm. And it was pretty interesting and in a way heartbreaking to see the actual condition of those giant legajos and the big books and things in the cathedral there. And it was an amazing work of preservation to make that available.
Why do you think they're hesitant towards digitizing?
Because it's the Catholic Church, and they don't know what might come to light, I believe. That's my personal feeling.
We went through more than one archbishop, and each time we had to renegotiate to continue with the
I
project.
mean, the church is a very secretive
But this was
organization
back
at best.
in early 90s, right?
No, we just finished the project. It took 15 years for us to, and we hired our people to go down and do the work so that it got done. And then we did some brete, and we also had published, we have a digital copy of the indexes to those collections on our website. That just went up within the last month.
There's one significant document that I could mention. Pancho Villa's birth certificate is in that collection.
Yes.
Wow.
Is in that collection.
And actually, Rick Hendricks, who's now the state historian of New Mexico, did an incredible amount of cataloging and research in that collection and has published, what, 3 or 4 volumes.
Yeah, that's what we just
the
have
birth
online
records.
now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
From that collection. So it's only, researchers have only begun to scratch the surface of what's in it. So all kinds of things probably remain to be found. And I believe, I mean, I'm assuming, but I think that one of the reasons the Catholic Church is very conservative in that area is that it's impossible for any one individual in charge of an archbishopric or, you know, a place at any given time to know what's in the collection, and there's a kind of reticence to reveal things on the part of the Catholic Church.
Molly, I need to add something in connection to this.
Go ahead.
Which is that despite the fact that we have these wonderful resources and potentially that history students could work on them, incredibly enough, we do not have a historian of Mexico at this university. And traditionally, of course, Dr. Sadler and Dr. Harris did wonderful work on Mexico and are continuing to do that. Even though I tried to convince Dr. Sadler that we should come back and teach classes. He's very happy writing stories. So that's partly, that's the funny part, that it is a serious matter. And the reason I bring it up is because if this is something that you're concerned about and interested in, writing letters is a good thing. And speaking of revolution, I don't think students often understand that their voice is heard at this university if they speak up and if they write letters, and their voice can be heard. So if this is something that you care about, I would urge you to say something and write a letter about it. Thanks.
Any more questions? If not, I have a little presentation to give to Barbara.
Oh.
When I talk, no, this isn't it. This whole
Good. I mean,
you know, library binding, good old fashioned, keeps the books safe. This is when I talked to Barbara a few weeks ago before she was going to come. I asked her the question, "What is your favorite book about the Mexican Revolution?" And she said, "The Wind That Swept Mexico," which is a photo essay about the revolution. It's an incredible book, and what Barbara said was, it makes you feel it. And it really struck me because several years ago, back in 2006, I had the opportunity to work with my friend Charles Bowden, who's in the back, the author, and Julian Cardona, who is the photographer of this book, Exodus, which is about Mexican immigration to the United States. It's a beautiful photo book that was published by the University of Texas. And the reason that Barbara's citing The Wind That Swept Mexico, oh, this is for you too, I'll tell you. This is a special bag. But in any case, the reason it struck me is that when Julian was arranging the photographs that he had taken over the course of 4 or 5 years, he traveled all over the U.S. and all over Mexico photographing immigrants, where they lived, where they worked, where they came from in Mexico, and where some of them went home to be buried. We were looking for a way to arrange the photographs and present them in the book. And one day, Julian was at my house, and we had 200 or more 8 by 10 sheets of paper, just printouts from the computer of his photographs. and we were arranging them on the floor. My house isn't very big. The floor wasn't big enough. But the idea was we could only have 115 photographs, so we had to, from those 200 or more, pick out the ones that were essential that had to be in the book. And it was a wonderful kind of exercise. And then the idea was to arrange them and how to write the captions for those photographs. And Chuck Bowden was there at the time, and he says, "The wind that swept Mexico." And I said, "What's that?" I felt terrible. I didn't know what it was. He said, "You don't have a copy?" I said, "No." "Well, you better go get one." So I went to the library, I got a copy, I came back. And the reason is that his idea, because of his familiarity with this book, this is how to arrange the photographs, with captions that were not really captions, but were more of a poem, a description of what had happened. And so that book was a very, very big influence on Exodus. And I wanted you to have a copy.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I was looking for a bag at home this morning, and all I could come up with was this. And I thought, that was not good enough. And then I turned and looked, and sure enough, I remembered that we had this bag. And it was one of those things Chuck said, you know, sometimes you have something, and then you look at it one day and realize that it should belong to someone else. And that's Pancho Villa. This came from Columbus. And it's heavy enough to hold.
I got it, since she's given me the book. We had the daughter of Anita Brenner at the library last year, talking about a new book about Anita Brenner. But this is what she writes about the Veracruz invasion. By April 1914, Huerta was left with only a small piece of Mexico, the capital and the Gulf oil coast. British, German, Dutch, and Americans were jockeying for position in the European war that was being prepared and was soon to break. There were incidents. Some American Marines were seized, and Americans under Admiral Fletcher seized and occupied Veracruz. We are invaded. Viva Mexico. Death to the gringos. Que viva la revolución. By July 1914, Huerta was in exile. That's it.
Short war.
That's it.
That's what, if you want to read or look at one book to introduce you to the Mexican Revolution, I agree. I think it's superb. You can read it in about an hour, and the pictures will stay with you in your mind forever, I think. So, anyway, thank you, Barbara. And we have a little reception with punch and cookies and things. So thank you to everyone for coming, and stop and have a drink and say hello to Barbara. And you can now check out
my
some
cards
of our
if
books
anybody
from
wants a
our
card.
library. If you search her name in our catalog, you can see the list of books that she gave us, and some of them are really wonderful.